Hello, I'm Jenny Chase from BloombergNEF. I'm an expert on solar power. I've been doing this for about 17 years, and I'm hopefully going to present some of the data that Bloomberg and my team have collected on investment in clean energy over the last 17 years. Sorry, is there a slide mover? Otherwise, I have to say new slide. This presentation will be on energy transition investment trends, which is mostly clean energy and electrifying transport, and a few other things that continue to be important or will become more important, like hydrogen. Could I have the next slide, please? Please, could I? So I'm a specialist in solar power. It's very interesting to be here because there's a lot more general conversation. So I've been listening to what people say on a very high level that I'm not used to. I spend a lot of my life worrying about how much solar panels cost today and how much they'll cost next month. So this is a very interesting place to be. Thank you. But my company, BloombergNEF, collects data on clean energy and what we call the energy transition, which I'll discuss as we go on. Oops. So we consider it to be solar, wind, storage, batteries, etc. Also advanced transport, which is mostly electric vehicles, but could eventually go to ammonia-fueled ships and such like. And we're also looking at the energy and carbon implications of buildings and industry and agriculture. And we also increasingly cover hydrogen, which is potentially a way to decarbonize all of these segments. Now, what do we consider the energy transition investment to be? So it's essentially capital spent on deployment of low carbon technologies. It's not grants offered in principle. It's not grant money pools, it's money actually deployed and given to companies and entities that will make use of it. And it's ideally for concrete projects. As far as can be ascertained, we're collecting data on investment which flowed rather than hypothetical data. So how much is it? How much is going into clean energy and the energy transition? Well, the answer is about $755 billion, which has been rising significantly for most of the last 10 years and is up from $526 billion last year. It's a really significant uptick, and it's mostly been driven by actually electric vehicle sales, mostly in the US, Europe and China, but also elsewhere as well. Electric vehicles are coming. And this actually also only includes passenger vehicles that will carry multiple passengers. There's actually a huge upswing in e-bikes and tuk-tuks and small electric vehicles that is not actually explicitly tracked by this because it's too distributed. But it was also last year a record for investment in renewable energy, solar and wind. And a theme that I think everyone should know is that investment in renewable energy is rising, but not as fast as volume of renewable energy deployed is. Wind and solar are getting cheaper. In the case of wind, it's getting cheaper per megawatt hour because turbines are getting bigger and generating more electricity per megawatt. With solar, it's pretty much just getting cheaper. Right now, there's a momentary blip where inflation is affecting the price of solar panels. There's a bottleneck in polysilicon capacity. The price of solar panels has actually ticked up a little bit this year. But we expect it to fall pretty soon because we have no idea why it's as high as it is. And China is bringing on a whole load of polysilicon factories this year, which we expect to debottleneck the industry. If we split this investment by continent, we can see that pretty much all the continents see growth in energy transition investments. Even from China to the very smallest country here, nearly all of them have growth going on in the rate of investment in the energy transition. China's big, of course. China's $266 billion of that $755 billion investment. And most of the other top 10 countries for investment are developed countries. But Brazil and India also making the top 10. India building quite a lot of solar and wind power, and a sliver of investment in electric vehicles. And Brazil, again, a lot of solar, quite a lot of wind. Brazil is really windy. And it has a policy whereupon companies can build solar projects and then send the power through the grid to their other sites. So it's essentially net metering. You can essentially use solar to balance nearly all the cost of your electricity and never have to export it at a lower price. And we do have information right down to project levels in quite small countries. So we collect, for example, information on the scaling solar tenders the World Bank have been organised around the world and their progress on actually being commissioned, which is a bit slower than usual because inflation has hit a lot of the projects in the developing world, but we're expecting them to happen eventually. In terms of where we have to be, I know the Sustainable Development Goals exist. We've also calculated how much investment the world has to put in to be on trajectory for net zero carbon by 2050, with a goal of 1.75 degrees Celsius of warming. We tried to run it for 1.5 and the model fell over. So it's very, very difficult to stick to 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming at this point. And we modelled several pathways to a net zero future, one of which is primarily renewables, that is more or less the one that's closest to happening as we see the world today, one that depends heavily on carbon capture and storage, and one that requires immediate and sustained nuclear build, which would still get the world to net zero carbon by 2050. It's not looking entirely likely right now, and it's quite a lot of money. It's the most expensive scenario so far. And essentially, there's about $2 trillion a year that would need to be invested in the next 3 years to be on path to a net zero future. And then $4 trillion per year for the next 5 years to 2030. And so we're currently at about 755 billion. We are not quite there yet. But we're growing. One thing I do know about clean energy investment is it can grow really fast and it can really surprise you. But still, we're not quite there yet. Breaking this down to just renewable energy investment, about 366 billion last year of investment went into renewable energy, mostly solar and wind, with a little bit of other and a tiny bit of biofuels. The world has really gone off biofuels from the 2004 to 2008 period. And solar is now the largest investment sector. Now, solar investment has gone up and down in the last few years, but this is actual megawatts built. And that just goes up, because basically solar almost every year gets cheaper, to the point where today it is competitive with fossil fuels in a great many geographies where they're sunny. Certainly India, China, most of the US. And so we are seeing, we see pretty strong historical build, and we expect this to more or less continue, perhaps with some slowdown as the markets that we've got start to build at a steady rate rather than build explosively. Solar is a very boom and bust industry. You tend to get countries building too much and then going, we better build some grid. And then having to invest in some other things to catch up. And then booming again, usually. Because solar is easy and solar is cheap and investors love it. One mechanism that's been particularly popular around the world, but also in developed countries, has been running auctions. So a clean energy auction is, if you're a government or a DISCOM or a utility, you can say, right, I want 500 megawatts of capacity, or I want 6,000 gigawatt hours per year of energy. Who will give me the best price? And you can set all kinds of conditions around that if you want time of day restrictions and such. And this is an estimate, this is our data on what countries have run auctions for clean energy and where they've been. They're generally on an upswing, largely driven by China. China loves clean energy auctions and has awarded a massive amount of capacity through them recently. But you've also got a sliver, barely visible for sub-Saharan Africa, this orange colour. And it's certainly a way to pilot solar or wind at a very controlled level. You can just buy power from one plant. You can buy it for the lowest price anyone is willing to give you, which helps because the government doesn't have to go and figure out what price it should be. They can just say, give me your best offer. And a lot of these plants have been built. Right now, particularly in South Africa, which has been the location for many of these auctions, projects are severely delayed because of capex increases, because of supply chain snarl-ups. We do expect them to happen eventually. And there's certainly a large pipeline of auctions that will be held in the next 5 years, probably. And we doubt these things are going away. So, clean energy it's growing. There will be more investment in this, including in countries that I haven't really talked about here. It's a very exciting investment opportunity for everyone. Thank you.